John Cryer, so you were a member of the left-wing socialist campaign group of MPs. I think that was till 2015. So that's the sort of, the radical grouping in the Labour Party. What happened?
I became chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party. So you've got to be fairly neutral to all wings. You can't be involved in particular groups. Well, I don't think you should. And so I mean, officially I may be still a member because the campaign group tends not to update its membership list very often. So my name may still be there, but I'm not a member of any grouping anymore.
So chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party, that's like the shop steward for Labour MPs. You're the equivalent of Graham Brady in the Conservative Party. And gosh, since 2015. Yeah. What's been the most difficult period in that job?
I'm not breaking any confidence when I say between 2016 and 2020. Well, 2016 and 2019. When Jeremy was leader, there were arguments about all sorts of things, and you have to try and keep the peace. What then happened was in 2017, of course, we went up at that election, and so things calmed down for a bit. But what then happened after that was that anti-Semitism came to the fore, and we just didn't address it. And more, it was almost weekly, anti-Semitism would be debated at the PLP, and things would get very, very, very heated indeed. And that was, I think, the most difficult period where tempers ran very high. And, without any shadow, all you've got to do is look at the report by the Equal Rights Commission to see that we broke the law on 3 counts. And the day they published that report, it's probably one of the worst days of my life. I joined the Labour Party at 15, and the idea that we'd broken the law 3 times, we weren't addressing it, we weren't kicking people out. I've not really spoken about it very much publicly, but behind closed doors I did. I was involved in some very, very sharp arguments about anti-Semitism. We only started to address it really after 2019, in my view and in my experience, because I asked these questions and the questions were never answered satisfactorily about what we were doing.
You're a rare thing in the Labour Party, John. You campaigned and voted for Brexit.
Yeah.
Did you feel like a pariah amongst your colleagues, most of whom voted Remain, and then after the result, the Leave result, tried to frustrate that result and have a second referendum?
Yeah, not really. I mean, in the PLP there were some sharp differences, but there were on the Tory side. I mean, one of the most difficult things for me recently has been this sort of parade of Tory ministers who come to the dispatch box and they pretend they were always Brexiteers. They weren't. Many of them campaigned for Remain. But what was the most difficult bit was that after the referendum result, I mean, then the real poison started. Now, in both camps, there are overwhelmingly, I think, in the Brexit camp, in the Remain camp, people are overwhelmingly decent, honest, truthful. They're not personal. But in both camps, you get an element who are deeply personal and vindictive. Now, I was then on the receiving end of some real nasty stuff, and it sort of showed me the worst. I think really the worst element in British politics. Constant threats, constant abuse. This is online, but also in public meetings. And I didn't mind it. I did public meetings about it after the result, so that people could basically come along and have a go at me, and they did. But I felt in the Parliamentary Party, people were quite accepting that, we had differences. I was the only member of the Shadow Cabinet who voted for Brexit. Well, the only one who's admitted to it. I mean, maybe there were 1 or 2 others, but they've never admitted it to me or anybody else. So I was the only one. And when the party shifted its position to a second referendum, I did think we were going down the wrong path, and we antagonised an awful lot of people in the North and the Midlands. But you know, that you got to a critical mass where certain figures in the shadow cabinet switched to that position, and it just became overwhelming. So I couldn't do anything to stop that. Maybe momentum's the wrong word, but I couldn't do anything to stop that momentum that was going in that direction. And I can remember there were like 2 meetings where I went along and I thought, this is it, we're going to go for a second referendum. And I think we made a mistake, and and I did. And the sort of area where I grew up, where you grew up, which tended to be Brexit areas, that's where we antagonised people. And I think now we're recovering from it, but it's taken a long time.
We know the same part of the world very well. So I grew up in Bradford, and your dad was my MP when I joined the Labour Party as a teenager. He died in a car crash when you were in your mid-20s.
Yeah.
Your mum was in the car, but she survived.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. That's a very sudden and horrible way to lose your dad. Can you talk me through how did you find out? Who called you?
The Chief Whip called me.
The Chief Whip?
Yeah, he was then Derek Foster. And sadly, he's no longer with us. And I got this phone, I was at work, and I got this phone call. And the switchboard said, the Chief Whip needs to talk to you. Now, I had no idea what had happened, so obviously he told me what had happened. And the car turned over. We never found out why, by the way. There were 2, the police did their own inquiry, and then there was a second inquiry. That's a bit of a long story. But the car turned over twice, and he was quite tall, so he died of head injuries. The back window was smashed out, so my mum crawled out the back window. So it was all pretty traumatic. I remember it was on the M1, and my mum and my dad were taken to a hospital in Watford. So I remember travelling I worked in central London, as I've done quite a lot. I travelled up to Watford, and that was it.
How do you deal with a trauma like that?
Well, you sort of live with it, I suppose. I mean, it's not easy. He was, funnily enough, he was the same age that I am now when it happened. You sort of think, for quite a long time afterwards, I kept thinking, I'll have to talk to my dad about that. And I was like, oh no, I can't. He's not here anymore. And you've got that sort of conditioned reflex that leads you to think he's still around, and obviously he's not. So I mean, he went well before his time. I imagine he'd have probably lived well into his 80s, 90s if it hadn't been for that accident. And he was always, it was sort of I suppose what made it more difficult was that he was you knew him, and he was such a live wire. He was like a force of nature. So it was difficult to accept that he was now no longer with us. And it's, you don't get over something like that. You just come to terms with it.
Did it make you want to go into politics?
Well, I was already involved. I mean, I was a left-wing I was a journalist then, and I worked on all sorts of publications, but that included sort of left-leaning publications like Tribune and various others. So I was already involved, and I was involved in local, wherever I happened to live in London. I mean, when you arrive in London and you grew up somewhere else, you move all over, depending on where the accommodation is and what you can afford, where the work is. And so I was moving all over the place. So I was involved in the local Labour Party wherever I happened to be, and that meant largely East London, various parts of East London, West London, Central London, south of the river on the odd occasion. So I was already involved. I was writing about politics. So it wasn't like it was a natural progression. Growing up, I never had any ambitions to be an MP. But actually, I was originally MP for Hornchurch, and that happened because of living and working all over. I knew people right across the capital. And I knew one or two people in Hornchurch. And they said, they invited me to come along and maybe think about standing, which I did. And then I was elected, which nobody expected because, it was one of those seats where my Conservative predecessor, Robin Squire, he had a majority of like 9,500. So I thought, there's no way I'm going to overturn that. But I always have a sort of fairly pessimistic view of these things. Even at the count, I remember being at the count on election night, 1997. And, it was obvious we were going to win. And I was still saying, I'm not sure we're going to do it. Because I was so used to getting stuffed,
Yeah.
Not sure if we're going to do it. And I didn't think I'd win. I ended up with a majority of, 5,700. But I can remember as the news came in, somebody said, oh, we've just won Hastings. And I went, just won Hastings? So next minute, you're going to tell me we won Shipley? A few minutes later, we won Shipley.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary.
It was quite a night. Your mum went on to become an MP.
Yeah.
That must have been a moment for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was really proud of her. She was, my mum, well, you know my mum, and she left school at 40. People don't believe me when I say this. When she left school, the school leaving age was 15. She was at a secondary modern school, which don't really exist now in most places. She was 14 and she was offered a job. And the head teacher said to her, well, you're not doing anything here, you might as well go. So she actually left school a year before the school leaving and started work at 14. And she never expected to do anything like be elected to Parliament. And I suppose, my dad was always sort of the centre of attention. But there was an all-women shortlist in Keighley, as there was in a lot of seats at that time. And my mum put a name forward. She didn't actually think of it. Me and my sister said to her, why don't you put your name forward? And actually she was selected on the first ballot and then won.
So, your dad was an MP, sadly gone. Your wife is an MP. Your mum was an MP. Your sister-in-law's the Shadow Chancellor. Are there any laughs on Christmas Day at your house?
Yeah, well, my wife, and she's like, and we've got small children, so things are always very, very lively, things are always good. I don't want to go into details,
but it's not just all politics. You promise us?
Oh no, because you have to agree to disagree about some things, like on Brexit.
Yeah.
Opinion is divided in my family. Everyone else is for Remain. I'm for Brexit.
Right, now this one I discovered while I was researching, didn't know this before. As a child, you appeared as an extra in the film The Railway Children. The
Keighley-Worth Valley Railway, which maybe many of the people watching this haven't heard of it. It's a preserved steam railway in West Yorkshire. My dad started it, not because he was able to buy it. He was just a local teacher, but he started the society which put together the money, raised the money, they bought the railway. Now, EMI, which was the film company who made The Railway Children in 1970, I think it was.
Yeah, 1970.
They went visiting various steam railways. There weren't that many then. And they were based in the southeast. So why they decided to film in Keighley, I've always imagined it was probably my dad could be very persuasive when he wanted to be. So when EMI arrived, he managed to persuade him to film it in Keighley.
Wow.
On the Keighley-Worth Valley. What he then did was he got himself the job as technical director for the summer, and he then got all the family jobs as extras. So I mean, the things he talked his way into, and we got paid $5 a day for hanging around in Edwardian clothes.
That's not bad in 1970.
It was a lot of money. I never saw any of it. My mum will deny this, but I never saw any of it. Yeah, £5 was a lot of money.
How old were you?
I was 6, and my sister, who was old, my dad, my mum, me, my sister, we were all extras.
Really?
Yeah.
All dressed up?
Yeah, well, my dad only did it because he was technical director, so he was behind the camera. But one of the last days filming, the bloke who plays, if viewers watch it at the end, my dad's in it in a guard's uniform. That was just because the bloke who normally played the guard, he was called Graham Mitchell, he's still around. He wasn't there, and my dad was about the same height and build. So the director said, well, just put on a guard's uniform. So he just stood around in the garden.
how-
It was brilliant.
How far do we have to go through the film? Whereabouts to look out for John Cryer? Where is it?
Oh, when there's a scene where there's a landslide.
Yes, right.
And-
That's the big scene.
Yeah, but then the railway children, the three, get presented with watches, and there's a band playing in the background, and the camera pans in on two little children. That's me and my sister, waving Union Jacks. You know.
You're a Brexiteer right back then.
Yeah, well, let's not go too hard on. People are only just forgetting what I did, you know.
Patriot right back then. John Cryer, real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.